Let's say you like fishing. Every day you wake up, you put on your overalls, you grab your fishing rod and you go catch a few fish at a nearby lake. Nothing unusual in such a hobby, and due to its serenity and connection with nature, this is a favoured pastime of many living outside the hustle and bustle of major cities. But let's say you arrive one day at the lake and you can't fish because the lake is disappearing. You would be inclined to think that unless climate change supercharged itself and localised itself directly upon this one body of water overnight, or perhaps unless some major draining effort was in motion without your knowledge, this would be impossible, right? Well, actually no, because exactly something like that took place at Lake Peigneur in the United States on November the 20th, 1980. Now, admittedly, that fishing analogy may not have worked all that well with Lake Peigneur in the first place. Lake Peigneur was a drilling site run by Texaco Inc., one amongst many in both the state of Louisiana and in the Gulf of Mexico. Not exactly an ideal spot for some serene fishing. As is common with oil drilling and excavation, accidents can occur. Some of these have been significant enough to come at a massive cost to waterborne ecosystems and to utterly ravage marine life. Think about the infamous Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010, when a methane gas explosion in the Gulf of Mexico resulted in the largest marine oil spill in the history of the petroleum industry, and generally one of the worst environmental disasters in history. According to the National Wildlife Federation, the accident and resulting cleanup operation wiped out as many as 167,000 sea turtles, somewhere between 2 and 5 million larval fish, billions of oysters, and caused huge harm to other species, including whales and dolphins. That event also caused massive damage to the coastlines of nearby regions, especially that of Louisiana. Around 160 kilometers of the state's shoreline saw its wetlands erosion double. This was in spite of Louisiana having one of the highest rates of wetland erosion in the world. But unfortunately, Deepwater Horizon wasn't the first oil-related calamity which shook Louisiana. The Lake Peigneur accident was another example, occurring a little over 30 years before. The results of that accident were a lot less spread out, probably a lot less irreversible, and certainly less well documented, but its results were perhaps just as ludicrous. The biggest casualty of the accident was to neither human lives, nor to wildlife, nor even to Louisiana's long-suffering wetlands. It was, instead, the freshwater content present in Lake Peigneur. The oil platform on Lake Peigneur was around 45 meters tall and had been established by Texaco a few years before at a cost of around $5 million. On the morning of November the 20th, 1980, business was as usual on the platform until the oil rig operators noticed that their drill had gotten stuck in the soggy lake floor. As the men struggled to remove it, it kick-started a sudden suction, which caused the entire site to begin a backwards flow into the lake. It seemed their drill had accidentally penetrated a main shaft of another intrusive man-made creation, the Diamond Crystal Salt Mine. Established in 1919, the main shaft of the mine led downward from Jefferson Island, an outcrop of land overlooking the lake, to several tunnels and caverns which ran through the rock under Lake Peigneur. The sediment beneath the lake was full of what were known as salt domes, pockets of salt formed when salt deposits intrude into overlying sediment, creating an artificial bump. Salt domes are a curious geological phenomenon, and the bumps they create can be fairly hefty, some of them the size of small islands. Louisiana is a state with many such bumps, with around 128 officially identified salt domes in total, with all of them the targets of salt mining. But given that salt lies relatively deep beneath sediment, the creation of a salt dome results in all overlying minerals and materials being pushed upward when a bump forms. This can include sand, earth, rocks, and, critically in this case, oil. This meant that both Diamond Salt and Texaco were targeting the same salt dome for two very different natural resources. Unfortunately, the collision between the two turned out to be spectacular. The 6 decades of salt mining had resulted in the fact that the mine beneath the lake featured massive caverns for the released water to pour into. Some of these were as large as 24 meters tall and as wide as 4-lane highways. The oil diggers had managed to drill directly into the caverns, creating a roughly 14-inch hole through which the lake water was now rushing. This, in turn, was causing the hole to rapidly expand, creating a vicious suction that began dragging all that lay above downward with reckless abandon. The oil diggers quickly abandoned their failing rig and piled into a waiting boat next to the platform. Before doing so, they cut free the barges which had been securing the platform, which were soon sucked into the vortex by the seeping backflow. Luckily for the men, Lake Peigneur was of rather moderate size and had an average depth of only 3 meters. They managed to make it back to the shore without any fatalities, from where they observed as the powerful current swallowed each of the barges and rigs, as well as almost some fishermen who likewise managed to escape just in time. But the danger was faced not only by those on the lake's surface, but the unfortunate and no doubt bewildered miners who'd simultaneously been at work in the mines beneath the bed of the lake. 55 miners were working in the mines that day, in caverns that were now filling rapidly with water. Their route out was an elevator shaft, which was extremely slow and which could only carry 8 men at a time. Fortunately, one of the engineers working in the mine had heard a peculiar sound in one of the tunnels. Upon investigation, this turned out to be fuel drums ricocheting against one another as they were carried down the tunnel by a stream of water. Due to the precarious nature of mining and the long history of mining accidents across the world, the miners were well schooled in immediate evacuation in the event of any alarm. The engineer quickly signaled for everyone to evacuate, and the men made immediately for the elevator. The swiftness of their evacuation was crucial, since the salt mine was mostly propped up by columns of salt. That salt would be quickly taken care of by the water, which risked bringing the entire mining shaft down in just a matter of minutes. Amazingly, despite the restraints of the single elevator, the miners all managed to escape unharmed. There were no fatalities amongst their group either, but the drama was continuing back on the surface, where the oil diggers, by now safely back on land, were watching with astonishment as the entire lake was now disappearing. The lake normally drained outward via a canal known as the Del Cambre into the Gulf of Mexico. Astonishingly, this canal was now flowing backwards, seeping salt water from the Gulf into the swirling raptures of Lake Peigneur. The water flowed swiftly into the shafts of the mine, eating up the space within. It did so more rapidly than the air in the caverns could escape, resulting in an extreme pressure which shot the air vents of the mine back to the surface and created an Armageddon-like geyser. And as the water level of the lake fell rapidly, the backflow from the Del Cambre Canal began to drop downwards from sea level height into the hole which the lake had become, like a tap flowing into an emptying sink. This, in turn, briefly created the biggest waterfall in Louisiana at a height of some 45 meters, but which disappeared again once the mine filled with water and the level began to rise once more. Still, the backflow continued for 3 days until the lake filled the subterranean caverns entirely and the water pressure leveled out. During that time, the Vortex had consumed the entire drilling platform, a fishing boat, a tugboat, somebody's house, a couple of hundred trees, and 65 acres of land, as well as a total of 13 barges, although 11 of these later resurfaced mostly intact. Once the backflow subsided, Lake Peigneur had become a sort of geographical oddity. What was once a shallow lake was now the deepest in all of Louisiana, with a new maximum depth of over 60 meters. The lonely chimney of the house, which had been consumed, now poked out from the water, which was now no longer a freshwater lake, but a brackish saltwater one with new flora and an entirely new ecosystem. It was also very salty, more so than a normal salt lake, and around 9 times as salty as seawater. Upon investigation, it appeared that Texaco Inc. had been aware of the location of the salt mines, but that a miscalculation had occurred in the depth of its drilling. The Diamond Crystal Salt Company had been equally well aware of the drilling operation occurring on the lake's surface, and according to an analysis by Louisiana Tech University, detailed maps on where the mining shafts were located had been shared with Texaco. Unfortunately, the Texaco engineer responsible for coordinating the drilling had mistaken the coordinate system on which the map was based for another, resulting in an inaccurate choice of drilling site. This, in turn, meant that the drill bit of the oil well had pierced directly into the roof of the mines, something that was obviously exactly what was supposed to not happen. Nevertheless, this didn't stop the Texaco Oil Company from maintaining that the Diamond Salt Company had kept the extent of its mining operations a secret. Diamond Salt, for their part, insisted that Texaco and their subcontractors had incorrectly triangulated the position of their drilling operation and sued for $260 million. And both companies were also sued by Live Oak Gardens, a local tree farm which grew plants and saplings, for the loss of 65 acres of lakeside real estate devoured by the suction. In the end, Texaco agreed to pay a settlement of $45 million, of which around $13 million was awarded to Live Oak Gardens in damages. Diamond Salt received more than $30 million, as Texaco were judged to have been ultimately at fault for the disaster. The workers who lost their lives got nothing, and most also lost their jobs, since the underground salt mining operations were brought to a halt with immediate effect. Diamond Salt was eventually later absorbed by Cargill Incorporated, one of whose business interests included, wait for it, petroleum trading. As for the lake, oh well, it still exists. Kind of. Over the coming days, the suction hole regurgitated some of the things that it had swallowed up. A few boats, trees, and other fauna, and some of the submerged barges. But there was much other infrastructure which was forever lost, buried in the submerged caverns of the former Diamond Salt Mine. These included trucks, a tugboat, and reportedly 3 dogs who unfortunately did not make it out, and who were the only casualties of the chaos. Lake Peigneur has now been reclaimed by nature, with a drastically new water content significantly deeper than before, as well as new fish species, new plants, and according to microbiologists Russell Vreeland and Heng-In Choi, the revival of salt-loving bacteria, some hundreds of millions years old. Today, to the naked eye, what remains as a testament to the accident is one peculiar-looking chimney poking out from beneath the surface, a solemn reminder of the dramatic risks that come from tampering with nature.